I would like to ask the Minister to provide information on the status of the carbon budgets and a clear timeline for publication of the carbon budgets and indeed the Climate Action Plan. Minister, with just over a week until we see the start of the COP26 talks in Glasgow, those crucial climate talks, and with only 9 years, in fact, until we see the 2030 deadline for achievement of our ambitious and welcome 51% reduction target, what we're lacking is a sense of clarity and a sense of urgency in the government's response and in the government's proposed measures to deal with the climate emergency and to show how we are going to achieve our emission reductions targets. Everyone I'm speaking to in the renewable energy sector and anyone involved in this is concerned about the lack of implementation measures and about the lack of urgency and indeed the lack of clarity. We were originally led to believe the carbon budgets would be published in the first week of October, before our fiscal budget. And it would have been preferable if we could have seen those budgets aligned. It would have been useful to have been able to scrutinise Budget 2022 in the context of our vital climate action targets alongside the carbon budgets, but we weren't able to do so. Now we see reports this week that the proposals of the Climate Change Advisory Council are likely to be published next week. Next week the Dáil and Shannon will not be sitting, and therefore it is going to be well into the commencement of COP26 before we will be able to have a debate in our own Oireachtas on these crucial documents, on these crucial measures in the carbon budgets and in the Climate Action Plan. And Minister, we're seeing a lack of clarity also on other key measures we need to be taking around climate. We see reports just yesterday that the Just Transition Commissioner will not in fact be placed on a statutory footing as was promised in the programme for government, and I'd like to know what the position is on that. And we also have seen real concerns about the announcement in Budget 2022 about the removal of the SEAI grant for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. This grant, which had already been reduced in July from €5,000 to €2,500. Now we agree with the need to incentivise the move to fully electric vehicles, and I do welcome the budget announcement in that regard of the extension of that grant, but there's still a lack of clarity and a lack of notice to people who may have made decisions around making a move to more environmentally friendly transport and who are now faced with this change. We need to ensure, Minister, that we have public buy-in for the measures necessary to tackle climate. We need to see, particularly in rural areas, that people are assured about and a kind of confidence in terms of decisions. And we need to bring people with us, and that is crucial in advance of COP26, and it's something that I know all of those who will be on Merrion Square tomorrow at 1 o'clock, where we're going to see pre-COP26 climate action protests taking place. I think all of those people, all of us, want to see real clarity, real certainty and real urgency from government.
First, the timelines with regard to carbon budgets, and again we have to be careful here because the Climate Change Advisory Council is independent in the way it's been established and the way it sets out its work, but my understanding is I think they're meeting on the 25th of October next week, and I hope and expect, subject to their process being satisfied with their own process, that they will then be able to issue the first of the two carbon budgets, the first 5-year period and second 5-year period, bring us to the end of the decade. And they will also be publishing, I would imagine, supporting documentation to show a lot of the research that has been undertaken within the Climate Change Advisory Council to justify the approach that they will recommend to government. That did require, first of all, the full complement. There were 4 final members of the of the Climate Change Advisory Council who were appointed. That had to await the enactment of the bill before we could do it under proper statute. And also the drafting of regulations, which we've now agreed and is allowing them to progress with their carbon budget to outline which greenhouse gases that we account for. So that had to be done first before they could then publish their budget. Once they do that, we expect very quickly, the following week is my indicative timeline, 3rd of November, for government to be able to consider a draft climate action plan, which we will be issuing in response. We've been thinking and obviously working on this a lot in advance. That will contain a lot of details, very extensive. Similar to the previous plan adopted by Minister Bruton, it will contain a very wide series of actions, but also main chapter headings setting out the strategic direction we need to take in this area. And it is transformative beyond compare, because the 50% reduction in emissions requires us to completely change our energy system, our transport system, our land use agricultural system, our industrial systems for the better. We can and will do this. A lot of the work that's been done has already obviously fed into some of the key measures that have already been put in place in the last month. I'd say for Housing for All, the key emphasis on town centre first, compact development, was informed by, we know what we're going to have to do on the transport side in our carbon budget. The fact that in the NDP there were just 2 departments which had the full kind of clear clarity around our 10-year budget programme, capital programme, 35 billion euro in the case of transport, 12.9 billion in the case of the Department of the Environment, Climate and Communications. We needed that clarity to be able to give those very sectors you mentioned real certainty around the scale of the investment the government's going to need to make, and in many cases the backup scale that will be needed for other investments. So there's a huge amount of work has been done. We will have it in time to go to COP with a draft climate action plan from Ireland to give it a sense of where we're going to proceed. But the real challenge now is going to be implementing it at the speed and scale that's needed to meet those right calls of concern by the climate strikers.
Well, Gurmahagut, Minister, and I entirely agree with you about the necessity for urgency and about the scale of the challenge facing us. And I am somewhat dismayed to hear that it will be the 3rd of November and into November, therefore, before we will see consideration by government, as you've said, of the draft climate action plan and publication of the carbon budgets. And that seems to me to be quite significant slippage, particularly as COP26 will have started on 31st October. So it's a real concern, given that these are measures which have had to be in preparation for so long, and we're all well aware of that, and we're all aware, I think, of the Section 6A timeline that the carbon budget was for the period commencing last January. So we know, therefore, that this is something that has been in preparation for a long time, and I think it's simply not good enough to see this slippage into November. I accept what you say about the Advisory Council, but I think it's really unfortunate to see that long ongoing delay. And Minister, I think I would like a response on the other issues I raised too, in terms of other measures that again require clarity. But I do think that we need to also emphasise the huge opportunity that lies ahead of us in moving from fossil fuel basis, and that's an opportunity that I think we need to grasp with positivity as well as urgency. Thank you.
First, I take your point about the date, but to be honest, we've had the decision. We said, do you go out straight away the day after the Climate Change Advisory Council hopefully published their budget approach, and I thought that was inappropriate. I thought it was better to give that a certain amount of time, and also the Dáil wouldn't be sitting. I prefer to come back and come to this House on the 3rd of November, which is in plenty of time for when the serious, real negotiations in the COP takes place in the second week in November, so it will be there in time for that. On the specific issue you mentioned earlier in terms of plug-in hybrids, again, that is something that it is absolutely appropriate that we do really focus the resources we have on the switch to 100% electric rather than plug-in electric vehicles. I think there's a lot of research, and I'll share it with you separately, showing that the emissions reductions from the plug-in sector are not sometimes what because of behavioural issues and so on, and they were far better to focus the resources we have on the switch that's now taking place at speed and scale towards 100% electric vehicles. That I think is the right policy choice.